It's just after noon Central Time, which means it's my privilege to welcome you to today's Alumni Career Webinar, A New Way of Working, Using Mindfulness to Transform Effectiveness, Productivity, and Happiness with Mary Beth Sigler. My name is Maggie Elmarathi, and I'm the Assistant Director of Career Programs for Alumni Career and Affinity Programs here at the University of Chicago. Our office is committed to helping provide alumni with the resources they need to stay competitive in an ever-changing job market and support the alumni community through career resources, networking channels, and job search capabilities. It's my privilege to introduce you to our presenter today, UChicago Booth School of Business alumna Mary Beth Sigler. Mary Beth is a 1995 graduate of the Booth School of Business and is currently a senior consultant to the Potential Project, a global organization that has delivered corporate-based mindfulness training in Fortune 500 companies in more than 22 countries. She is also an experienced leadership and executive coach with more than 20 years of experience coaching executives and their teams. She works with senior leaders, managers, and high potentials to develop greater professional effectiveness and the leadership tools needed to successfully advance their careers. She specializes in emotional intelligence and mindful leadership, and she is also a professor at New York University in the area of leadership and human capital. Today's webinar will include practical exercises, examples, as well as tools and techniques to integrate mindfulness into your daily work life to make you more productive, effective, and happier. Portions of today's webinar will also be interactive. Mary Beth will ask for your input throughout the presentation, and I encourage you to chime in with your thoughts using the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel. Now, let's get to the reason you've all joined today, and let me welcome Mary Beth.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm just going to share my camera. And Maggie, if you could let me know when I show up.
You are all set.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled to be here. If your weather is anything like it is here outside of New York today, it's a beautiful sunny day. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope you find it informative, and it's my joy and pleasure to share this with you. Just move this out of the way as much as I can. So let's get started here. Give me just a second. Okay. Okay, so a little bit about me. I had that very nice introduction, but I'd like to just tell you that the reason why I'm so passionate about this material is because when I started my career and when I came out of Booth, just about 20 years ago, I realized that I was stressed out all the time. I was under a lot of pressure. I wanted to perform well. My career was early. And I felt like it was very difficult to be effective and be happy at the same time. So about 5 years into my career, I fell into a love of yoga and meditation and mindfulness. And it's just been such a pleasure to watch the growth of mindfulness, especially in the business sense, grow over the last 20 years. That's what's really helped me keep my sanity throughout my career, and so part of that is why I'm here today. I'm thrilled to be part of the Potential Project, which is a global leader in corporate mindfulness training. We started out in Europe. It's growing exponentially, moving big time into North America, so definitely listen for us in the news coming over the next few years. But we work with a number of companies, and this is just a representative list of some of the companies that we work with. And you know, why do all of these companies use mindfulness? What is the appeal to them? Maybe some of the reasons that you joined this webinar today. So let's get to the agenda. So we're going to start by looking at what we call the paid reality of modern work life and what that means. And we're going to look at how work life has changed over the last few decades. We're going to look at some neuroscience, how we work today and what that means for the brain. We're going to look at attention and what that means for our results and our success. And we're going to practice a new way of working using mindfulness and learn what that means. Okay. So let's get started. So in every company that we work in, every country, no matter what type of organization, big or small, what we find is that everybody experiences what we call the paid reality. And this is that they feel pressured. They feel like they're always on, the cell phones, emails, messaging, always coming at us. There's constantly a source of information overload. And as a result, we spend most of our day distracted. So let's take a little look at what that might look like. So see if this looks familiar to you. So some of you may relate to that. The ramification of this for us and being in a paid reality is that our brains historically would be focused just on one thing at a time. So if you look to the left of the screen, 50 years ago when we were at work, we would be focused on one single thing, a typewriter, a telephone. There wasn't nearly as much information overload. When we look at today, we have any number of sources of information coming at us, often at the same time. And that's important because our brains historically were used to focusing on one thing, and now we're asking them to focus on many things. And from a neurological standpoint, that really just isn't ideal. And there's a term for this. We call it attention deficit trait. And what research has shown over the last 20 years is that attention has steeply declined. Our ability to pay attention has decreased significantly. And researchers have actually put a number on the percentage of time that our mind wanders. So we're going to take a little poll, and in the question box on your screen, I'd like you to type in what percentage of time do you think, on average, your mind is wandering in the course of a day versus being focused on a task. So type in some answers. And we'll give a few seconds for those to come in.
Mary Beth, I can just break in here with some of the responses we're getting. We're seeing pretty much everything from 15% to 95%.
Okay.
The majority want to say somewhere around 60 or 75, it looks like.
Okay, wow, we have a bunch of mind-wandering people in attendance then. Okay, so not quite as bad as that, but still a significant number. So 46.9% of the time, our minds are wandering, which from a performance perspective means that only 53% of the time our mind is actually on task, right? And think about what that means for you and your effectiveness. Think about what it means for the people you work with, your team, your reports. As a leader, how would you feel if you knew that your team was only focused 53% of the time, right? So significant impact on effectiveness and productivity in the workplace. And of course, Dilbert has something funny to say about this. So I'll let everybody read that. So we all recognize our tendency to get distracted, right? We have text messages going off, we get pulled away from conversations, we lose focus on what we were doing. The question is, why does this matter? Why does attention deficit really matter to us? Well, because attention has been shown to have a direct correlation to results. So in order to achieve results, we need to take action, right? It's pretty hard to have success if you're not taking some specific actions to get there. The actions that we take are determined by what we decide to do, right? Our choices. So we make choices about what to do, what will make us most successful, what will bring about results. And those choices come from our minds. What do we choose to give attention to? So we can see that what we give attention to creates our choices, creating our actions, and determining the results. And in the words of Accenture, understanding and managing attention is now the single most important determinant of business success. So that's why we're looking today at mindfulness and the ways that it can help us gain some attention. So this is what we call a graph of the attention economy. So in the past, prioritization and time management skills might have been enough to make us much more productive. But today, in that paid reality, what we actually need in addition to those time management skills, are calm, clear, and focused attention. And I see this all the time with my coaching clients. They may have great time management skills, but if they can't find the attention to focus during the day, their productivity never really can increase. So let's look at one other example of what typical attentiveness looks like during the day. So here we are sitting in our office, trying to focus on the task at hand, and our mind is going off to what we're doing later that day. Later, as we're on the golf course, what are we doing? We're thinking about dinner later, or maybe what we're going to be doing that evening. And then the natural progression is, while we're at dinner, our mind goes back to work. So this should sound familiar to most of us. It's the way that our minds as humans just naturally work. So this just shows how not present we are most of the time. In addition, our minds tend to try to focus on multiple things at the same time. And there's a word for this. We probably all know it. It's called multitasking, right? Our brains are trying to focus on multiple sources of information, maybe trying to focus on doing two things at once. But from a neurological perspective, what researchers have found is that this actually is not possible. Instead of focusing on multiple things at the same time, our brain is actually switching from one thing to the next and to the next. And this can be an incredibly inefficient way of going about your day. And we're going to look at some research why in a few slides. But first, let's test out our multitasking skills, because I'm sure all of us have actually gotten very good at multitasking, and we'll look at why that is as well. So if you could, grab a blank piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, something to write with. And we're going to draw 4 lines across the paper. So just go ahead and draw 4 lines. I'm going to pull out my timer. So we're going to time this. So don't start until I ask you to. But what I'd like you to do when I ask you to start is on the first line, write, I am a great multitasker. And on the second line, write 1 through 20. And I'll call out 5-minute increments or 5-second increments so that when you finish, you can know approximately how long it took. So ready? Go. So that's 5 seconds. 10 seconds, and 15 seconds, and 20 seconds, and 25 seconds. So we'll stop right there. Most of you, hopefully, have finished. So now we're going to do this again, and we're going to do this as if we were multitasking, and we'll start to see what effect multitasking actually has on the brain. So this time when I ask you to start, I'd like you to do it exactly as it shows up on the screen. First write an I and then 1, and then jump back up to A and 2, M and 3, and so forth. And I'll time this again, and I'll call out the 5-second increments, and then again you can write down approximately how long it took you to finish. So go ahead and go. So that's 5 seconds, and 10 seconds, and 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 25 seconds, 30 seconds, 35 seconds, 40 seconds, 45 seconds, and we'll stop at 50 seconds. So hopefully most of you got through that. I know when I did this for the first time, I definitely found the second one a lot more difficult. What we found is that the second exercise actually takes on average twice as long as the first. The brain, it takes longer for the brain to switch from one to the other. Secondly, we find that most people can do the first one very easily without any mistakes. But the second one, we either make mistakes or we're just on the verge of making a mistake when the brain catches us. And thirdly, we find that the second one is definitely much more stressful than the first, particularly when you hear the time pressure, right? That feeling of being pressured is part of the paid reality. So, multitasking actually is not the best use of our brain's resources. It makes us less productive, less creative, and much less able to make good decisions. So let's take a look at why. There was a very big research study a few years ago at Stanford University. And they went into a lot of different organizations and studied different people multitasking and measured the effects of that on the brain. And what they found was this, that multitasking reduces efficiency due to switch time, the time to switch back and forth. It kills your ability to prioritize. It decreases quality because you tend to make more mistakes. It hampers creativity because your mind is actually really very full. It drains your energy. The brain actually needs energy to do most of its daily tasks, and multitasking tends to drain the energy faster. Increased stress decreases well-being. And importantly, it starts to shrink the brain. We have less gray matter in the areas that actually matter most, like the prefrontal cortex. And importantly, it rewires your brain. So we may get better at multitasking, but multitasking, when it becomes your default working mode, you can see all of these other effects that it has and why those wouldn't be ideal. So if multitasking isn't the answer, what is? We have two very simple rules, which we call the rules of mental effectiveness, which are meant to counteract multitasking. So first, focus on what you choose. So let's use an example of you in your office at work. And let's say you're very focused on an email. You're very focused and concentrated, and you're writing the email. And suddenly, in the background, you hear two colleagues, and they're talking about their weekend and their weekend plans and what they have going on. And you get distracted away, right? Your mind possibly wants to listen in. Even if you don't want to listen in, you're having a hard time finding focus. So rule number one says, learn to take distractions and let them go. Release them and come back to focus on what you choose. Rule number two says to choose your distractions mindfully. So let's use that same scenario. Let's say you're working on your email and your boss comes in and she needs to speak to you urgently and she's knocking on your open door. You could continue to type your email while turning around and having a conversation with your boss, but that wouldn't be really very effective, would it? So what mindfulness tells us is that when we have to take our focus away to something new, we should do that mindfully. So we would step away from the email that we were working on and turn and give our full attention to our boss. So focus on what you choose and choose your distractions mindfully. And for those of us that are a little more visually oriented, we have a great 2x2 matrix. So rule number one, we have at the top focus, and the opposite of focus down at the bottom, which is distraction. And rule number two, we have being aware of where you're at, what you're focusing on, and being able to mindfully switch into another focus point if you should need to. The opposite of that is autopilot, when we're so deeply in focus that we're not fully aware of what's going on. Okay, and these quadrants, we've labeled them. So number two would be mindfulness, right? Full focus, also fully aware so that we can make the right choices. Quadrant number one is what is commonly known as that state of flow. So we're fully focused, but we're also on autopilot. We have a hard time pulling ourselves away and deciding if something else might require our attention. Quadrant number four is what we call the creative quadrant, where you're fully aware and your mind, you actually want it to be a little bit distracted. what we've found in working with clients in mindfulness is that that creative state sometimes starts in quadrant 4, and then if they can move it up into quadrant 2, that's when they find actually a lot of creativity. And quadrant 3 is where we don't want to be at all, which is a mindless state, distracted and on autopilot. And that's where a lot of us spend a lot of our time, trying to focus, trying to plow through things, constantly distracted. So what mindfulness helps us do is that it helps us work smart so that we don't need to work so hard, right? We want to conserve our mental energy so that despite all of the distractions and the information overload, that we can actually get all of our work done without working so hard. There is good news to all of this, that it is actually possible to find this, because research over the last few decades has shown that the brain can change, and the brain has what they call plasticity, right? So over time, the brain is constantly changing, and this is an animation of what the neural networks of the brain look like. New neural networks form in the brain depending on how we use the brain. So you can actually get very good at multitasking. However, if we want to direct the brain towards attention, we can rewire it towards attention. And that's what mindfulness is. We want to learn to rewire our brains to focus on attention. So mindfulness is learning to manage our attention. It's learning to manage where we put our focus and what kind of results we will get as a result. So in addition to the true rules of mental effectiveness, there is a foundational practice of mindfulness training. And if you've had any exposure to mindfulness, you probably know this. We keep it very simple. We call it the ABCD model. And what it is, it's a breath awareness mindfulness practice. So we're going to walk through this. I'll explain to you what each of the letters means, and then we'll do maybe like a 30-second mindfulness training, and we'll just get to experience what happens as we sit down and we bring attention and manage attention to the breath. So A stands for anatomy. So we want to sit nice and tall, shoulders down, face nice and relaxed. Your hands, you can just put them on your lap. Your eyes typically would be closed. B stands for breath. So the breath in the mindfulness practice is the focus of the attention. It's what we call the anchor for our attention. We always have the breath with us, so it's something that we can always come back to in order to find that focus and clarity. C stands for counting. As we go through the practice, you'll see that it's actually very difficult to bring your attention to the breath and hold it there. Unless you're a long-term meditator, and even long-term meditators have still, it's very common, it's what we call the monkey mind. The mind wants to jump around. There are thoughts, there are noises, there are sensations, and that's really the D, distractions. Distractions will come up, but what we want to do in mindfulness is just let go of the distraction, not get caught up in naming it even, or realizing or thinking too much about what it is, and coming back again to the breath. So let's go through a 30-second mindfulness exercise. So if you could, sit nice and tall in your seat. Just relax the shoulders, relax the face. Hands can be resting in the palms and in your lap. And go ahead and close your eyes, or you can half close them so that you have very soft focus. And then start to notice your breathing. Bring your full attention to the feeling of your inhale and your exhale. And then let's start to count. So for each inhale, exhale, we will count 1. We'll go up to 10, and then we'll go from 10 back down to 1. So I'll start us out. Let's inhale and exhale, count 1. And inhale and exhale, 2. Go ahead and continue on. And then go ahead and open your eyes. So that was a basic mindfulness training. And if you're like most people, what happened pretty quickly, maybe before we even got to 5 in the counting, was that you noticed that your mind started to get distracted. What this practice does by focusing on the breath, it helps train what we call the attentional muscle. So the brain is a muscle like any other in the body. And by practice, just like we train our other muscles to get stronger, we can train our brains to get stronger. The breath-focused mindfulness practice is one of those practices. By doing 10 minutes a day of a basic mindfulness practice, such as focusing on the breath, our brains get stronger, our focus gets stronger, our focus not only on learning to focus on the breath, but being able to focus on the things that are most important to us during the workday, like our work or our projects, or possibly whoever's speaking to us. And what we've learned about the brain is that we can really start to rewire the brain using that neuroplasticity to build stronger neural networks that give us, over time, more focus and more attention, and therefore more effectiveness, more productivity. And we'll see why we also get happier and less stressed. So mindfulness is really about managing our attention, right? It gives us that laser focus on the task at hand. And everything outside of that scope, stays there. It stays in soft focus outside. Remember, we looked at that attention economy. It's not just enough to be able to prioritize our time. That calm, clear, and focused attention is so important to our productivity and our effectiveness. And why I love this topic so much is that while we can all love effectiveness and productivity, and that's a wonderful thing to have, many, many thousands of studies have been done on mindfulness. Scientists over the last 20 years have really refined their ability to study the brain. And what they've found is that mindfulness doesn't only impact productivity. It has a lot of implications for us, which are positive. So these are just a few. It strengthens our cortical thinking, gives us better cognitive control. It gives us increased emotional intelligence, increased creativity. It makes us kinder, happier, more compassionate people. We're less stressful, and as a result, happier, and our memory improves. And that's just in the mind. Let's take a look at the body. In the body, because of that reduced stress, our blood pressure becomes imbalanced. Our cells decrease in the speed at which they age. We get better sleep. There's increased blood flow to the body and the mind, increasing and improving immune function and decreasing the heart rate. So you can see why these would all be very good reasons to undertake in a mindfulness program in and of themselves. So much research has been done specifically within organizations. And I love this chart. It shows, you can see the study on the very far right and which specific part of organizational effectiveness they looked at with the study. So things that were improving and increasing with mindfulness at work: job performance, problem solving, job satisfaction, work-life balance. And then the things that were decreasing, the bottom arrow going down, starting with emotional exhaustion and going down through multitasking down to stress. So mindfulness has been proven to have a significant impact on our ability to show up and be more effective, more productive, happier at work. And what I'd like to ask you now is if you would consider undertaking a 30-day challenge. And what impact do you think mindfulness for 30 days would have on you? And specifically, what I'm asking you to consider is a simple 10 minutes a day of focus on the breath. So mindfulness training of the mind. Remember, we want to use and train the muscle that is the brain to focus. And to practice the tools of mental effectiveness. So I'd like you all to think about doing that for 30 days. What I can tell you is that studies have shown that even with 2 weeks of mindfulness practice, in fact, I was at a seminar last week with Richard Davidson, who's a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin, who studies specifically mindfulness and its effects on the brain. And he gave us a very recent study and statistic which said that mindfulness practitioners who practiced for 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks had significant impact. So only 7 hours of mindfulness practice, significant changes in all of those mental and physical outputs that we saw. So we could start with 10 minutes a day. That alone will be enough to start to see some change. But taking that forward, you know, mindfulness goes beyond just training the mind. It's also how we show up and how we act on a daily basis. It's how we listen, it's how we communicate, it's how we walk and how we eat. So I'd like to take a little pause at this point in the webinar and take a few minutes and ask you to write down a few things for each one of these that you might be able to do to be more mindful. So on an individual basis, what are some things that you might do to be more mindful? From a technology standpoint, right? Turning off notifications, turning off phones when we don't need them, silencing pop-ups, giving our brain the full ability just to focus on what's in front of us. And I think across the organization, things like mindful meetings, right? Asking attendees not to bring in cell phones, not to bring in work. Think of how effective and productive our meetings would be if everybody was fully focused on the person speaking and on the topic at hand. So take a few more seconds. I encourage you, think about some ways that you might adapt the 2 rules of mental effectiveness into your day. And then before we lead, and maybe to inspire you, I'd like to close with some quotes from some of our, oh, we have this. I'm sorry, I forgot. Listening mindfully. So I threw in a couple of examples at the last minute so that we would have something to maybe get some inspiration from. So this is what listening mindfully looks like for us at the Potential Project. So we use this little acronym called STOP, which means silence, right? So fully focused on the person that is speaking. We're tuned into them. We're not in our own head thinking about what we might be doing in an hour. We're really focused on what they're saying. We're open and receiving to what they're telling us, and we're fully present. And then, in addition, speaking mindfully. When you speak, is it appropriate? Is it compassionate? And by timed, we mean, is it relevant? Is it short and only what you need to say? And I think if you can practice just these 2 things and taking a more mindful approach to speaking and listening, you will notice a difference. The people that you have relationships with will feel more heard. They will feel that you're more present with them. And I'm sure they will actually be a lot happier around you when you are with them. So try that out. It's one example of using mindfulness in a daily practice. And now to close, to give you some inspiration about what some of our clients have used organizationally to adapt mindfulness. So using it within a leadership team to unlock potential and creativity. Using it to build effectiveness and personal well-being, right, among high-stress consultant teams. It's being used within advertising to boost creativity. It's being used across organizations for employee engagement and organizational performance. And finally, focus and productivity is great, but what this client found is that the employees are actually becoming better human beings. They're more compassionate, they're better listeners, they're better team members, and they're happier. So just to recap, I'm going to put out there the 30-day challenge. My email address is at the bottom of the screen. Would love to hear from any of you how this goes if you do attempt it. I'm happy to provide you additional resources if you need it. If you could try 10 minutes of formal meditation per day using the ABCD methodology. And Potential Project has an app as well. You can use that to get some guided mindfulness exercises. And then practice the 2 rules of mental effectiveness. Focus on what's in front of you. Let go of distractions. And if you need to switch your focus, choosing that distraction mindfully. Okay, so that comes to the end of our webinar. So we'll open it up to questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mary Beth. We actually do have a couple of questions that I can chime in with here.
Okay.
So for those of our attendees who are interested in taking on the 30-day challenge, what time of day would you recommend that they undertake the 10 minutes of meditation? Is it best to do it right in the morning when you get up, when you get home from work? Do you have any thoughts or recommendations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm a big proponent of doing it first thing when you wake up. It helps provide a nice, clear, calm focus for the day. Obviously, everybody is different. Some people like to wake up and go straight into exercise. So I'd say whatever is the most optimal time for somebody's schedule.
Great.
At night before bed is a great time to do it as well. It really helps get a really great night's sleep.
And just a follow-up question to that, we had somebody ask here what the best environment for the ABCD exercises.
Another really good question. Right. So you want to be somewhere quiet, ideally. I mean, you could sit in a chair. You can sit on the floor if you're at home. Somewhere where you can sit nice and tall and be comfortable. But we lead mindfulness sessions in corporate settings as well. We go into conference rooms. We have teams of people sit down. It's really anywhere that you can find to take a break. Close your eyes, spend a few moments just drawing your attention to your breath. I use this practice a lot with some of my clients, whether it's 10 minutes or 5 minutes in the middle of the workday. It's what we call taking mindful pauses. It's giving your brain the chance to reboot, recharge, right? Get refocused again. So you could do this practice anywhere, really. But I'd say if you want to get the full benefit, somewhere quiet, somewhere where you won't find the distractions happening.
Thank you. And one more quick follow-up question. This just came in. I thought this was interesting. For those of our attendees who have scheduled exercise maybe in the morning or right after work, is mindfulness training possible when you're on sort of a routine exercise machine, something like an elliptical or treadmill, or would you really recommend taking that 10 minutes out of your day otherwise and sitting down and finding the space to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a lot of clients who love their exercise and they have a really hard time with the sitting still part of mindfulness. I think obviously the sitting still part is when we really find the focus. So I think what you put into it is what you would get out of it. That said, mindfulness and using my breath, a focus more of the breath has made my tennis game better, right? If I'm more focused on drawing out, lengthening, just staying clear on my breath, I get out of my head a little bit. So you could absolutely try it on an exercise machine, see what happens if you try to stay with your breath. You'll still have the same distractions that are popping up, the thoughts, the sounds, the sensations, but that might be an interesting thing to try as well.
Great. One more question we have here. So as instant message becomes more prevalent in corporations and people are expected to be on and available instantaneously pretty much at any moment of the day, do you have any tips or tricks for dealing with that expectation in your work environment? How are you going to make the decision to choose wisely what you focus on if you're also having that expectation in the background?
Yeah, I think, it comes down to the expectation and what is the organizational culture around that. If you're truly expected to be instantly responsive to instant messaging, then, you don't have much of a choice, and I think that's when mental effectiveness rule number 2 comes in. You would need to be able to pull your attention away, check the message, and decide if it's something that you need to address right away. If your culture allows you, it doesn't have to be instant response. I like to, when I'm working, I have my phone, I have it off. I either turn it downward so I don't see things popping up, or I open up my desk drawer and I put it inside my desk drawer when I need to focus. And then, what I work with clients on a lot is scheduling time to come out, go through emails, go through text messaging, and then again, put it away, and then give yourself the ability to focus again on whatever you're focused on. So I think it depends on what the organizational culture is with respect to how quickly you need to respond to the messaging.
Great, thank you. So we're having a lot of questions come in. So maybe, Mary Beth, if we have a little bit of overflow, we can send these out to you after the presentation if you have any
Absolutely.
thoughts. Okay,
Yep.
great. So I'll just chime in with another one here. Have you noticed any generational differences between undertaking mindfulness training for people in an older generation maybe, or a younger generation in your work?
That's an interesting question. My personal experience with it is that the younger generations are very open to it. I think mindfulness has become part of the culture that we live in, with Wisdom 2.0 and all sorts of other mindfulness organizations popping up. And I think there's a lot of receptivity to it. I see a little bit more resistance to it from the older populations, but it really depends on how informed they are about it and how open they are to trying it.
Great. Well, like I said, we have had quite a few questions come in. Some of them are a little bit more specific, so we may send those over to you offline, but I really want to thank you very much for taking the time today to present for us. This was really interesting, and I know that I learned a lot, definitely.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone again who's on the line and who joined us for today's presentation. Just as a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar in the next few business days. It will also be available on our website, careers.uchicagoalumni.org, if you'd like to view it again or see any of the slides again. And also, you will be receiving an invitation to take a survey about the presentation in the next few days as well, and we'd really appreciate it if you could fill that out and send that back in for us. So thank you again for joining us. We hope to see you at our next Alumni Career webinar, and if you have any further questions, please feel free to email us at alumnicareerservices.uchicago.edu, and we can pass those over to Mary Beth as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.